we gotta talk about the future of Bethesda. I actually planned to make this video last week, before Shattered Space, as I assume Shattered Space would launch a sort of resurgence into Starfield for many. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem like this one really connected with audiences, but I also think this release, and really this year overall, gave us a really good idea of where this company is going next. So we'll dive into that, because for some of you, the future of Bethesda will be incredibly promising, but for some others, you might not exactly love this direction. But of course, the undeniable and really the biggest talking point around Bethesda right now is Shattered Space, and really Starfield overall, and the fact that it just doesn't seem to be connecting with audiences, at least not on the same level of some of their previous titles. Lots of people point towards the review scores or even current player numbers, but there's another aspect that I don't see many people talking about, and that's just this general lack of interest in Starfield content. For me personally, I thought I'd be making Starfield videos on a weekly basis for the past year or so, but the reality was, just a couple of months after the release of Starfield, the audience for this game, at least on YouTube, just wasn't there. I made this video on Starfield mods roughly 2 months after the release of the game, and it got less than half the views of my typical uploads at that time. And no, this isn't just me reminiscing about some old Starfield videos, because the exact same thing is true once again right now. We're here, just a little over 1 week from the release of this new DLC, and it doesn't really make financial sense for me to keep covering Starfield unless I'm just completely shitting on the game. And no, despite what many comments love to say, I don't just make up opinions for views. Otherwise, believe me, I would be deep into the criticize everything train, because trust me, those videos are a lot easier to make than actually playing the games to form opinions. And talking to many other content creators, the exact same is true for them. Starfield videos simply don't perform well, and I do think this has a pretty big impact on the overall community in a way. But who cares? I'm just one idiot on the internet. Where this became a bit more telling to me was in the lack of interest even on some of Bethesda's own videos for Shattered Space. This Starfield deep dive was a really good video. We got a more lax style of hearing from several developers while also just seeing some of the very first gameplay of Shattered Space, and beyond relatively short and highly edited trailers, this was some of the first Shattered Space content we actually got. And this all came at the peak hype period, just 2 weeks before release. But then we also saw CDPR release a Phantom Liberty 1-year anniversary hype montage. It didn't include any new announcements or anything like that, but this little hype montage ended up getting more views than the Shattered Space deep dive in just 2 days. So now, of course, this is a very imperfect comparison, but it still does feel very informative. Even before release, it felt like the hype around Shattered Space wasn't as high as it was for the base game and even past Bethesda expansions. And as it came to the release of the DLC itself, a lot of players and even critics just didn't really connect with this DLC. It currently sits at just 29% positive on Steam, and as much as people will say this is a review bomb or artificially negative reviews from those who didn't actually play it, this almost perfectly tracks with the 31% critic recommendation. And well, yeah, gaming journalism isn't necessarily the highest bar. From what I can tell, basically all of these people did actually play the DLC, and it's just not really connecting with them. And mind you, the base game got really good critic reviews. And even when it comes to the Microsoft Store, Shattered Space only has a 3.3 overall rating, although to be clear, that's out of 5, not out of 10. And when it comes to the actual player counts as it stands right now on Steam, Starfield is definitively behind both Fallout 4 and Skyrim, although of course a ton of people are playing Starfield on Game Pass, which isn't going to be counted here. But even on Xbox, it's not like Starfield is doing crazy numbers. It's just 2 spots ahead of Fallout 76. And I've seen this common argument that Starfield is a new franchise and as such performing just as well as these past titans from Bethesda is actually a good thing, but this is just a random day for Fallout 4 and Skyrim. It's not like these games got recent updates or a major drive to push new players, these are just typical numbers for them. While conversely, this is likely the highest player count Starfield will hit this year, and the fact that it isn't passing Skyrim on Steam the day of its new DLC release does feel indicative of something. And even when you look at the Xbox numbers, Fallout 76 hasn't gotten a major update in some time, while Starfield just got its biggest release of the year. Starfield just being 2 spots ahead of Fallout 76 just doesn't seem great here. And the simple reality is, I think many of us were expecting or even predicting that Starfield and Shattered Space would be performing quite a bit better than it is right now. Although honestly to me, it's hard to gauge much of anything from those stats, as you don't have the full player count picture. Well, the one stat that I see barely anyone talking about that does feel incredibly informative is the early access players. If you purchase the Starfield Premium Edition, you got early access, but also a free copy of Shattered Space. During the early access period on Steam, aka the one place we actually have numbers for, Starfield hit about 250,000 concurrent players at its peak during early access. So at least 250,000 people on Steam own Shattered Space. And yet, since Shattered Space's release, the game has only peaked at a bit under 22,000 players. So even though we don't have the complete picture, this still feels very informative to me. A ton of people owned the DLC on Steam, yet didn't even bother reinstalling the game to give it a try. And mind you, these are some of the dedicated fans. They literally paid extra to play this game early on release, but didn't come back a year later for the first expansion. So that was a ton of negativity about Starfield, but I also think this is just reality. If you have some stat or metric that we can look at that goes against what is being portrayed here, please tell me about it. Because at the end of the day, I personally want Starfield to succeed, and if you're somebody enjoying the DLC and even the base game of Starfield, more power to you. And frankly, I think it's sad that I even need to say that it's okay to just like a video game that you're playing alone. But gaming discourse is pretty horrible right now, and many of you watching this video right now are part of that problem. But for me, I am disappointed in Shattered Space. I think for $30, this DLC felt small. As I played it, there were things I was looking for that it just didn't deliver on, and even though Starfield conversations online are pretty garbage, it still does seem like most people overall didn't really connect with this one. And honestly, one of the reasons this bums me out probably a little bit more than it should is it feels like this was the prove-it moment for Bethesda Game Studios and Starfield. Bethesda hasn't really been having a great run of things as of late. Financially, it seems like they're probably doing okay, but they've had some broken games, problematic updates for their games, as well as a ton of paid mods that have left many in the community wanting more and wanting better. And I personally thought Shattered Space would be that thing. Bethesda's opportunity to make a really cool DLC and show this is what they're good at, to win back some fan support around Starfield and maybe even reignite interest in the game as a whole. And I think what bothered me the most is it didn't even feel like they tried to do that. To me, it just didn't feel like there was a meaningful attempt to win fans back with Shattered Space. And instead, as I was actually playing the DLC, it felt like they knew this was a DLC that many had already purchased, and they developed it with that in mind. Instead of going above and beyond, it really felt like they did what they needed to do to get the DLC out and move on to the next. Because in my eyes, this is definitely not Bethesda's best work, and I've seen them do better. So for me, it's disappointing that they didn't do better this time when it felt like they really needed it. And I honestly do think if review codes were seeded, if some of these reviews came out ahead of time, it would have hurt player interest. And to me, it felt like this was the moment. It'll now be roughly a year wait until the next expansion with Starborn comes out. And do you really think that one will sell even better after all of this? Bethesda has already confirmed the updates going forward are going to be less frequent compared to 2024. So we very likely just had the most content-rich year for Starfield yet. And this overwhelmingly negative response does make me wonder if something will change. Earlier this year, we very unfortunately saw a bunch of layoffs and even studio closures at Bethesda. Bethesda Game Studios themselves were impacted by some of these, while Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks were fully shut down. Tango Gameworks was literally just coming off an award run with Hi-Fi Rush, and even the VP of marketing at Xbox described this game as a breakout hit, but the studio was still closed. Roundhouse Studios was also closed, but thankfully absorbed into ZeniMax Online Studios. So now, I don't think Bethesda overall is going to be shut down, but we know Bethesda wants to continue making Starfield content. We've heard from both Emil and Todd Howard how they want to do this, with Todd mentioning yearly expansions as long as players stick around for them. But does this sustain that? I honestly don't know. Starfield is the mainstay on the top 50 games played on Xbox, but so is Fallout 76, Skyrim, and Fallout 4. Perhaps the Game Pass audience is simply enough to keep things going at the current pace for Starfield, but it definitely seems like the main issue would come with opportunity cost. Bethesda Game Studios has a lot of valuable IPs that aren't necessarily being utilized to their full potential right now. Even Microsoft reportedly wants a new Fallout game out faster, and after these studio closures and layoffs earlier this year, we heard from Matt Booty, the head of Xbox Game Studios, who said, "Today, I'm sharing changes we are making to our Bethesda and ZeniMax teams. These changes are grounded in prioritizing high-impact titles and further investing in Bethesda's portfolio of blockbuster games and beloved worlds, which you have nurtured over many decades. To double down on these franchises and invest to build new ones requires us to look across the business to identify the opportunities that are best positioned for success. This reprioritization of titles and resources means a few teams will be realigned to others, and that some of our colleagues will be leaving us. So as we sit here and look at the wake of Shattered Space, it makes me genuinely wonder if Xbox could force something to happen here. Because honestly, I think a Fallout 4 DLC that released in 2024, even 9 years after release, would probably outsell Shattered Space. Not that I think they will release more Fallout 4 DLCs, but I think the market is changing, and I think Xbox is too. Is Starfield a high enough impact title? Because to work on more Starfield content means not working on more Elder Scrolls or Fallout content. As of right now, we don't have a perfect picture on the Starfield numbers or even what Xbox thinks of them, but it wouldn't shock me if they aren't happy, although it also wouldn't shock me if they are perfectly content. But if anything, I could totally see Starfield coming to PS5 sooner rather than later. But even beyond Starfield potentially seeing less content going forward, this entire Starfield situation, along with other things like Fallout 4 being pretty broken right now, and broken by an update Bethesda released this year, has been a worrying trend for many fans out there. So as we do start to look ahead at what's next after Starfield, some fans are fearful of where we go from here, with Bethesda's next game, The Elder Scrolls 6, being one of the most common concerns, where some fans feel like The Elder Scrolls 6 could be in trouble. So now, I don't personally feel this way, but I also think The Elder Scrolls 6 is going to look very different compared to all of the past Bethesda Game Studios games, and I think we're starting to see what it'll look like with what we're seeing with Starfield right now. It really feels like Creation Club was the most notable kickoff on this new trend, the new Bethesda. Paid mods coming back for Fallout 4 and Skyrim once again, but then they followed that up with Fallout 76 and the Atomic Shop, eventually pay-to-win mechanics in the Atomic Shop, and then of course Fallout First. But even under Microsoft, we see things like paying more to get early access to a game, a paid mod shop coming to Skyrim, but then also debuting for Starfield right alongside free mods. And well, some of these paid mods I don't really mind. The DLC-sized mods in particular are genuinely a good addition in my eyes, although that may be a controversial opinion here. But at the same time, there is a lot of stuff on these paid mod shops that I don't think should be there in the first place. Earlier today, we got a paid mod that gamifies fast traveling in Starfield, largely making it harder. That mod cost $1. I've spoken at length about some of the problems I have with the mod shops in this video, but when it comes to Bethesda, they're getting in on this too. And I think this is where some players start to have bigger issues with the entire situation. The Escape is a $5 microtransaction quest for a $70 game. So now it's a very good and incredibly enjoyable quest. I thought it was one of the best quests in Starfield overall, but still, you're paying $5 for one quest. In his interview with Mr. Matty Plays, Todd Howard made it clear that this type of stuff is part of their 10-year plans to support these games. Paid mods like The Escape or even the Trackers Alliance quest we got earlier are there to hold over fans while Bethesda is working on the next big thing. The Trackers Alliance was literally added as a faction to Starfield that really was just a blueprint to add more paid mods on top of it. Felt like this is something they'd keep revisiting. As of right now, we only got one paid quest for this, but I have to imagine more will come. And like I mentioned a bit earlier, they also plan yearly expansions as long as there is a player base for them. I don't think fans will have nearly as much of an issue with this aspect of things. Starfield, of course, just saw its first expansion with Shattered Space, but we also know Starborn is set to come next year, and it seems incredibly likely that this will be Bethesda's plan going forward for all of their games. There might be big waits between games, decades between title releases, but if you're dropping an expansion every year, or even every other year, that 10-year wait doesn't seem nearly as bad anymore, along with a bunch of other paid mods in between. And I would fully expect all of this to continue as long as it's working for them. And it'll probably work even better with The Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout 5 since they have such big inbuilt audiences. I see this overarching hope in the community that Bethesda will move away from some of this stuff and even do some kind of apology run before The Elder Scrolls 6, showing what they learned from their mistakes with Starfield or even with Shattered Space, but I have to ask, why would they? Starfield broke records, and I wouldn't be shocked if Bethesda is posting some very positive financial results from some of these paid mods. I've spoken to many authors, and for some, this is genuinely life-changing money. You can make good money with creations right now, and a lot of people are. I think particularly with gaming, the lessons are learned when finances stop making sense, and at least from every everything I can see, I don't think Bethesda is having a problem with finances right now, especially under Microsoft and particularly with these new creation stores. So if I was making a bet that as we look ahead for Bethesda's future, the exact formula we see right now will likely continue. A big game release followed up by both free and paid mods getting added about 6 months later, with both the community as well as Bethesda themselves adding paid mods to that shop, with the ultimate goal of being yearly expansions as long as players continue to be interested in them. Because from a profit margin perspective, it certainly seems like Shattered Space is going to be way more profitable compared to the development of Starfield itself, where you have an absurd amount of content in that base game. And honestly, I'm not even really giving an opinion here. I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. I feel good about some aspects of this plan and bad about some other aspects of it. But again, if I was betting, this is what I think they're going to keep doing over and over again with their next several games, because I think it's working. I think there is a decent chance we see the Elder Scrolls 6 in 2026. It's a bit of a weird situation with this one. During the FTC trial, Phil Spencer said the Elder Scrolls 6 was 5+ years away. He's the head of Xbox, he obviously knows what he's talking about, but a different Microsoft lawyer during that exact same trial said the Elder Scrolls 16 was coming in 2026. And based off this leaked roadmap, 2026 does line up a little bit better. So I'm cautiously optimistic about a 2026 release date, although that's definitely wishful thinking on my part. And even when it comes to Fallout 5, we really don't even know what's going on with that game. Microsoft, of course, came out after the Fallout TV show and reported that they want a Fallout game out sooner, but last we heard from Todd Howard, he said Fallout 5 might not actually be next after the Elder Scrolls 6, so who really knows? The next Fallout game very likely won't come from Bethesda, and honestly, if I was predicting, it probably won't be from Bethesda, although I am hopeful it will be out before the end of the decade. But either way, those are some of my thoughts on Shattered Space and the situation surrounding that, but also where I think Bethesda is going next, because I think a lot of what's happening right now with both Starfield and Shattered Space is a major indication of what's going to happen tomorrow.